So yesterday, President-elect Trump, Vice President-elect J.D. Vance, and a whole host of patriots attended the annual Army-Navy football game, and it was epic. It was so good. It was also pointed out that Joe Biden never once did that, not once. As the national anthem was being sung by cadets from both West Point and Annapolis, President Trump stood at attention and saluted. A military flyover followed. The crowd went wild. It felt different, y'all. It felt better. It felt like the America that's been missing for a few years. I've heard it said that the Army-Navy game is one of the only sporting events you can watch where every member of both teams is committed to the idea of giving their life for every person who is watching the game. And that's humbling. But it's so true. And my sense is that this was not a one-time moment. Patriotism is back. Pride in America is back. Peace through strength is back. So we were discussing the concept of peace through strength on my radio show not long ago, and I made mention of the fact that in the studio, next time if you're watching online, you'll see it. In the studio on the shelf behind me, there's a small sign just sitting there on the shelf. A small handmade sign bound in olive drab 100-mile-an-hour tape, which is what the Army calls duct tape. I had it hanging on my wall in my team room in Baghdad, and it sums up what our mission was back then. It simply says, win friends, kill enemies. And there you have it. So like if Phil Williams ever became president, I will have already formed my doctrine. The Williams Doctrine. Win friends, kill enemies. I actually used that phrase as the title of a paper that I wrote some years ago when I was an instructor at the Joint Special Operations University at MacDill Air Force Base. The premise of the paper was that we need more of what I call warrior diplomats, people who are perfectly capable and comfortable with forging real and lasting relationships, because relationships are key to so much of what needs to get done in this world. At the same time, though, those same people who are willing to forge relationships need to have the ability to project that when an enemy chooses not to reciprocate those efforts at forging a relationship on the world stage, that we may have to take action. Action that is designed to debilitate our enemies, leave them wishing they had chosen to be our friend. I mean, to some folks this may sound a bit odd, like a dual personality of some type, but I don't think so. It's a life. It's real. It's about forging alliances and meaningful partnerships, and if someone chooses to get in the way or to try and do harm to those that we love, then they should understand that we will not long suffer the fool who takes action against one of our own. General James Mattis, he was a warrior, man. General James Mattis. In his 43-year career as a Marine, he was much loved by the Marines who he led. And there are many famous Mattis quotes. Two of them, though, fall in line with what I'm trying to convey. At one point, Mattis told his Marines, you be polite, be professional, but you have a plan to kill everybody you meet. And it was not a joke. On another occasion, though, the story goes that he spoke directly to his opponents, and he gave them a choice to be their friend or their foe. But he made very clear what would happen if they chose not to be friends. It was during the war in Iraq. Mattis's Marines were near the end of their deployment, and he had sent back their armor and artillery, and all of a sudden, trouble began to arise. Well, they were just straight-leg Marines in one of the most difficult spots in the world, and Mattis knew they were vulnerable, and his enemies knew it too. So he went to each one of the tribal leaders, and he spoke more than candidly. In his own memoir, he recounts that he told them, I come in peace. I don't bring artillery, but I'm pleading with you. With tears in my eyes, if you mess with me, I will kill you all. And it is said that he had no more problems after that. Look, foreign policy and the art of warfare as conducted by Western societies, and notably the United States, is exactly what too many liberals are afraid to identify with. It is what we have not seen much of in the past few years. The idea that we must, as a nation, embrace the fact that the most successful instances of international relations come from times that our allies and our foes easily recognize and identify with the fact that the U.S. leadership will just as willingly win friends or kill enemies. I mean, the U.S. does more to win friends in the midst of killing enemies than any nation on earth. But the perceived justness of a nation's intent to conduct war has not historically been accompanied by a determination to rebuild the country with whom the war is fought, but the United States has always brought that change to bear on the landscape of modern warfare. You look at it. When we are the strongest and when we are the most peaceful are the times that we employ the attitude of peace through strength. We will fight you, and then we'll shake your hand and we'll help rebuild you, but the bottom line is this: don't make us fight you. You're better off being our friend. We need warrior diplomats who are willing to win friends or kill enemies. Now, like I said, that's been missing for a while. But think back over the past 4 years, under the Biden administration. I mean, is there anybody in the Middle East right now that feared Joe Biden? Is there anyone in China who believed that their interests were better served by ensuring they had a strong relationship with the U.S.? Have the drug cartels and the coyotes on the southern border had any concern whatsoever with the ramifications of their efforts to undermine our U.S. society? No. If oil prices are steep, would the OPEC nations pick up the phone when we call? Probably not. When we warned Russia not to invade Ukraine, they did it anyway. And when we abandoned friends and allies in Afghanistan, the Taliban were just emboldened. Look, the world is filled with foreign leaders who stopped valuing our friendship and had no fear of having us as an enemy. That's because the Biden administration is filled with nothing but glass ceiling, do-nothing beta people who insist that climate change is the existential threat to our way of life and that your use of pronouns is the clearest indicator of your worth. I feel certain that if I were to give a speech to the senior staff of the Biden State Department and I used the phrase, win friends, kill enemies, the majority of them would be triggered and the rest would just be at least somewhat offended. But let me tell you about a personal experience. In Baghdad, 2004, I became aware that the Iraqi National Archives in my area of operations had been looted and burned. This was their version of the Library of Congress, where historical records and documents were kept, but immediately after Saddam's overthrow. The Iraqi people themselves had gone on a rampage built up by years of pent-up anger from being abused and kept in suppression by Saddam's regime. And the archives had been looted and partially burned. So on one patrol, I directed my team to go ahead and pull in through the front gate. And we began walking up to the front door. There was an Iraqi man there who held dual citizenship in Great Britain and Iraq, and he had come home to begin restoring the archives. He came hurriedly out the door to meet me, did not seem to care at all for our presence. "What's going on?" he said. "Why are you here?" I told him who I was, and I wanted to know if there was something I could do to help. He looked shocked and really kind of offended. He said to me, "Major, if your troops had stopped people from looting, we would not be having this conversation." I nodded my head and I said, "Well, if your own people hadn't looted and burned their own archives, we wouldn't be having this conversation." And there was a pause, after which he smiled and he said, "I suppose that's true." And after that, we got along great. And I was able to actually help return some missing items and things we found on other patrols and coordinate for some overseas assistance. Look, it is possible to be in a difficult spot and still develop friendships, build relationships. It is also imperative that on the world stage, though, our foreign policy has at its core the notion that it is best to be our friend, and that if we extend the hand of friendship, you should not reject it. We must build relationships to further the fight, and we must fight to build those relationships. Relationships forged through warrior diplomacy, it makes things happen, and the underlying thought that it is better to be our friend than our foe should always be on their minds. But the truth is that the Biden administration found that line of thinking somewhat offensive. They would rather that we just led from behind and apologize for being the biggest dog on the international block. Look, I'm not surprised to have seen President Trump standing at attention and saluting during the Army-Navy game. I'm equally not at all surprised that Joe Biden never did. It's how they both do things. It's how they view the world. Trump believes in leading from a position of strength. Biden believes in apologizing for being strong. Well, for a number of years, we've seen a leftist agenda that has stymied our national pride. It's kept a tight rein on our military's ability to do what it was designed to do. I mean, I've seen firsthand what happens to a military that has to endure a woke agenda. On a very personal level, I will tell you, in Afghanistan, as part of a small special operations community, my team inserted early. We got there early in the war. My 6-man team was co-located with a 12-man special forces team. We had 2 PSYOPs guys and 1 Air Force combat controller, and that was it. And we lived among the Afghan people. We wore civilian clothes. We drove civilian vehicles. Sometimes we rode horses, and we lived among the Afghan people for the better part of a year, and all of us had beards. In the austere environment we operated in, the beard was more than just a lack of shaving. It was an identifying with the populace. It was how they could see us and know that we were somewhat like them in a sense. It was an identity thing with our allies. And it removed a small amount of stigma when I met with the warlords and the local leaders and the mullahs because the beard meant something. I had a good beard too. Full coverage, ear to ear. Epic. But then the liberals got wind of it. Now, understand that of the less than 20 U.S. service members that were in my area, all of us, part of the U.S. Special Operations community, well, part of my role differed in that my team not only did combat operations and patrols and all the things, but we also coordinated humanitarian aid in the middle of the battlefield area. And the liberal aid organizations that came and went, like Doctors Without Borders and the United Nations High Council for Refugees and a few others, it just chapped them to see some guy walking around with a beard and an M4 rifle getting more done than them, by the way. So what? I mean, why do I care what the libs think of me? Well, politicians back home apparently cared. So when the liberals began to scream that there's men out here with beards and guns, well, imagine my surprise when the order came down for my team to shave our beards. Never mind that 14 other special ops guys that I was with and lived and worked with on a daily basis didn't have to do so. Just myself and my team. I mean, truthfully, the beard didn't make that much difference by then. I mean, by then I had earned the respect of the local warlord, General Daoud, the Afghan provincial governor, Governor Latif, the other members of our community, but yet the principle remained. Politicians were back home issuing a decree because of a liberal agenda. And 6 of 20 American Special Operations troops operating in an austere condition without any support and no flagpole anywhere in sight. Suddenly we got an order and it was purely political. It made no sense. But it made the liberal politicians back home feel better about themselves. And that's what liberals do. They see the military as nothing but a petri dish in which to grow their liberal experiments. Look, I recognize that not all Democrats feel or act that way, sure. But too often the far left side of the political spectrum is willing and able to use the military to assist them in feeling better about their progressive policies by means of experimentation, by means of coverage for their bad mistakes, and by means of accomplishing their purely political objectives. So let's be clear. The military is subject to the directions and sometimes the whims of civilian leaders of our nation, and I get that, and they should be. But civilian direction is not supposed to degrade readiness. It is not supposed to equate to experimentation. It is not supposed to abuse service members. The military exists for the sole purpose of defending our nation's interest, to win wars, to kill enemies, to do all that is necessary to ensure that the national defense and the nation's interests are preserved and promoted. Politics mixed with military solely for the purpose of political gain does nothing but degrade who we are as a nation, as a people, and it gets people killed, to be honest. It's beyond time for civilian leaders to go back to a position of strength and readiness, not equity and wokeness. It is time to go back to a place where on the world stage, they know that the United States of America will have peace through strength. And oh, by the way, we will win friends or kill enemies. And the world's not a stable place. Even more so based on 4 years of the United States being dragged through the Mad Hatter's Tea Party under the Biden administration. I mean, we have to restore the sense of identity that made us the cowboys of the world. We have to walk in our God-given authority as a force for good and a foe to evil. It's a sense of maintaining our national honor, of not allowing someone else, much less a rogue group of violent, backward-thinking, hairy-knuckled misogynists out there who just hate America and say death to the great Satan, not allowing them or anyone else to dictate our reputation on the world stage. Our honor is of our making. It is a sacred matter not to be taken lightly. And because this is our country, our home, our refuge, a place where the sweat of our brow and the work of our hands has forged a future for our kids, our country where the generations before us labored and fought and loved and laughed to form a more perfect union. Because of that, we have duty, honor, and country. And that is far more than just a phrase. It is not some melodramatic intonation of old school promises. It's real. To the vast majority of Americans, it is. I mean, sure, the network news wants you to believe that critical race theory and Antifa and white supremacists and Black Lives Matter and LGBTQ, yada, 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 that those things and those fringe elements are the core of the system. In some way, the true nature of who we are, but they most certainly are not. The core of our citizenry recognize the value of our national heritage. The vast majority of Americans will fly the flag and stand for the anthem and volunteer for the cause. Duty, honor, and country. Now, duty, honor, and country, General Douglas MacArthur, he elaborated on those three concepts in an iconic speech at West Point in 1962. In one segment, he said that those three words, he said, quote, symbolize a great moral code, a code of conduct and chivalry, he said, of those who guard this beloved land of culture and ancient descent. For all hours and for all time, he said, it is an expression of the ethics of the American soldier. That I should be integrated, he said, in this way with so noble an ideal arouses a sense of pride and a set of humility, which will be with me always. He went on to say, duty, honor, country, those three hallowed words reverently dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be. They are your rallying point to build courage when courage seems to fail, to regain faith when there seems to be little cause for faith, to create hope when hope becomes forlorn. Well, look, we still have that full capability as a nation, as a military, to fully engage this process and to fix this situation that we're in, to restore the pride and the patriotism that has been flagging for 4 long years. And I'm no rocket scientist. Militarily, I'm just an old colonel, a salty ranger who still tries daily to beat back the ravages of time and pop another Tylenol when it catches up to me. But I can see a few things. I can. Even from this side of the far horizon, I can see a nation that is hungry for leadership that reminds them of who they really are. The biggest dog, the greatest friend, the one who helps the hurting and hurts the harmful, the one that promotes the good and opposes the bad, that the by God United States of America, where it is better to be our friend than to be our foe any day. Yeah, I say we get back to when friends kill enemies. That's my philosophy.